This show brought to you by Circle of Seven Productions, www.cosproductions.com. Please be sure to subscribe and welcome to our circle.
Well, hello, everybody. It is Patricia W. Fischer here on Readers Entertainment Radio. It is Thursday, July 13th, one day short of Bastille Day in France. It is also Harrison Ford's Han Solo, Indiana Jones, his 75th birthday, and it's also National French Fry Day. So keep those things in mind when you're walking around and trying to think of something happy. And I know something else that will make you happy. I have an amazing author here today, Camille Di Maio, and let me tell you a little bit about her. Camille recently left an award-winning real estate career in San Antonio to become a full-time writer. Along with her husband of 20 years, which is an absolutely adorable love story, by the way, she homeschools their 4 children. She has a bucket list that is never-ending and uses her adventures to inspire her writing. She's lived in Texas, Colorado, Pennsylvania, Virginia, and California, and spends enough time in Hawaii to feel like a local. She's traveled to 4 continents so far and met Mother Teresa and Pope John Paul II. She just about fainted when she had a chance to meet her musical idol, Paul McCartney, too. Camille studied political science in college, but found working on actual campaigns much more fun. She overdoses on goodies at farmers market, justifying them by her support for local bakeries, and she belts out Broadway tunes whenever the moment strikes. There's almost nothing she wouldn't try, so as long as it doesn't involve heights, roller skates, or anything illegal. The Memory of Us is Camille's debut novel, and her most recent release, that just came out a couple months ago, Before the Rain, is available now. And so welcome, Miss Camille Di Maio.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So I hear you're on a bit of an adventure right now. You're way up in Maine.
We're way up in Maine. It's been 58 degrees today, and I've been bundled under blankets, and for the first time maybe in my life, I wore socks with sandals. I'm a little embarrassed, but it was just that kind of weather day.
Yeah.
And I only packed sandals.
Socks with sandals. Yeah, that's definitely a sign of you're going to be warm at all costs fashion choices there.
Yeah. Age before beauty for sure right now.
Exactly. So I know that Maine is extremely popular and well known for its lighthouses. And because you are a historical writer, since you're up there, getting any inspiration for future books about lighthouses?
Not about lighthouses specifically, but I've actually been having a lot of lobster experiences while I've been up here. And I've been to Camden several times. This is my 5th time here, so I'm really absorbing the culture more and more every time I come. And so I'm kind of starting to play around with a 5th book that will be partly set here in Camden. So it wasn't a
It is really a very picturesque town.
It is. I was just at the local library today taking all sorts of pictures. I don't know where I'll use them or how, but I've got to collect those things being a writer, right?
Well, yeah, because you don't know. I have the good fortune of a friend of mine lives in Rockport, and I went up there one year in October, and it was chilly, and it amazed me so much outside stuff, considering that they don't get to use a lot of it for part of the year, a big chunk of the year. But that one area over the library, if anyone ever gets to go to Camden, you've got to go to where the library is because it overlooks the harbor, and it's just got this big lawn. And that's the place where they have the statues that are benches with books underneath. Is that place?
I haven't walked outside quite so much. Now you're going to have me go over there looking for it, but I just go inside, and I can't leave because it's just so amazing inside, too. But now I'm going to have to check out the outside.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's very cool. So I know you're an avid reader. Were you always an avid reader?
Always. I spent recess time. I just enjoyed the company of the library more than some people have on the playground, and so I spent all my recesses in the library, and I got through just about everything the school had, and it just began there, and it's never really ended. I have a goal this year of reading a book a week, and as of this week, I'd already hit 52 books. So I kind of have to rethink my goal for next year and maybe strive a little higher. So I've got a car book, the first book, a bathtub book, a nightstand book. There's always something going on.
Right. So do you favor fiction versus nonfiction, or you just kind of mix it up?
Favor fiction because I really see reading as something I just want to lose myself in the story, and it has to be very, very narrative nonfiction for me to get into that. And I think that's why historical fiction is one of my favorite genres. I feel like I learn a lot while still just being absorbed in story. And so I tend to write that way too.
So, and speaking of the way you've written, the very first book, Memory of Us, and that was inspired by a famous pop song, correct?
It was. It was inspired by the Beatles song Eleanor Rigby. I just love that song. My dad always called it the 2-minute novel, so I apparently turned it into the 330-page novel. It was really inspired by the names or anything like that, but anybody who's a fan of the song will certainly see where all the influences are.
And was when you had that moment, I know the story is that you and your sister paid way too much money for these tickets for Paul McCartney concert, and you had a sign up that said, I wrote a book about Eleanor Rigby, correct?
I did, and I just held it up. He actually played the song at the concert, which is apparently the first time that song has ever been in his set in all his years of doing that. So that was especially amazing that he's right here in front of me singing the song I'd been researching for so many years. But I did, at the end of the song, I held up a sign that said, I wrote a book about Eleanor Rigby. May I give you a copy? And it was really just a manuscript at this point. That's a long word to put on a poster. And he called me up to the stage and let me give him a copy. And I just got blacked out after that. So it was pretty amazing.
Did he keep the copy?
He didn't give it back to me. So, he kept it on the stage for a while. Actually, he first started reading from it. He read it to the audience, a little bit of the prologue, so I was really dying over that. And then he put it on a amplifier, and it stayed there the rest of the concert. So somebody took off with it at some point. It's in somebody's hands. But he had it up there the whole time.
Yeah, that's not intimidating at all, that, a music icon like Paul McCartney starts to read your book out loud in front of a concert. This is
well, pretty much at that
that's
point,
something in a book.
Published, if nothing else had ever happened, I could have died happy right in that moment. It felt like a lot was fulfilled. So the fact that good things just came after that those were the cherries on top. It was a pretty special moment. And to be there with my dad was with me, and he was my big Beatle influencer. So that was just out of this world to be there with him.
Wow. I mean, I guess your tickets could have been called research and you could have written it off, right?
I think it was a gift. Somebody gave them to me.
Oh, fair enough.
Because she knew we were such fans. So, yeah. But had that been I think I could have used that as a write-off. Good thinking.
Yeah, there you go. So you've been this avid reader all these years, and then what made you transition from, or what was the spark or the whatever catalyst that transitioned you from reading to I want to be a writer? Now, because we all do I could write a book, but to truly do it, what was that transition?
I knew when I was 12 that was a life goal of mine. I would spend all that time in the library, and there was just these names of these authors, and they were such mysterious people to me. It was pre-internet and social media, and I just wanted to be in their world somehow. So that was always really intriguing to me, and that was just a dream I had, and I thought it would be something I would do once my kids were all grown. And then I read the Twilight series and studied the author, went to her website and studied that, and I realized that she said on her website that she wrote the Twilight series while she was at swim team practice with her 3 kids. And it was a lightning moment for me. Oh, we do swim team practice. I can write. If she can do it, I can do it. And it was, I think, within that week that I heard the song Eleanor Rigby come through on my iPod, and it just all came together with inspiration, the thought process that, yes, I can, in fact, do this, and here we are.
And here we are. And so not only do you have Memory of Us, Before the Rain Falls just came out a couple of months ago. And so do you have characters that bridge over, or is this a completely different story?
It's completely different. The Memory of Us is set in World War II, Liverpool and London, and The Memory of Us is set in 1940s Texas women's prison. So I don't know, maybe I could write a book where I merge them someday, but that would be quite a feat. They're pretty different.
And so that's kind of an interesting discussion, because you've gone from, World War II London, which we've seen a lot of films and books set there, and your next choice was to pick a Texas women's prison. So what was that? Where did you get that idea?
I was watching a documentary one night about miracles, just flipping the channels, and it came on, and they were trying to find scientific evidence behind miracles. And it just got that writer brain in me thinking about things that were true versus things that were faked. And I had this image come to mind of a young girl in a portrait, and the portrait is supposedly weeping. And just from that, I started asking questions. Why is the portrait weeping? And it turned into this story where a woman had murdered her sister, and the woman she was convicted of murder, and she was sent to prison for it. And the sister is the girl later on who's in the portrait. And that I intended for the prison scenes to really just be a flashback in a chapter. But as I started to research that chapter, I found out really, really fascinating things about women's prisons in that day. And it
such as
in the particular prison I was researching, there was something, it was called the Goree Prison, Goree, and there was a band, an all-girls string band in the prison, and they had a national radio show, and every Wednesday night they were on the radio from prison, and they had a huge following, but they couldn't go to her because they were all incarcerated. I thought, that is so fascinating. And I've learned since then that there's actually a very big Texas prison music history, but the Goree Girls were some of the biggest acts around in that. So I brought that element into the book. I learned about the Texas prison rodeo, where the prisoners were doing the things we would see cowboys do at rodeos. So I brought in a very strong rodeo scene into that, and I said, this can't be a chapter. This has to be half the book. So I love about writing historical fiction is the writing can take you places you don't expect just because of the research.
Right, because the rabbit hole opens and you're like, well, I really am only looking for this, but man, that looks really cool. And 3 hours later, you realize way down the line. But I think a lot of people too, I've had a lot of discussions with people about why don't you write historicals, and it's because of the research. It does take a lot of time. You do have to be very committed, because you can't just throw something on the page that you saw one documentary. It has to be pretty specific, and because you're writing about people's lives that were truly there.
In some cases, yes. My main characters are completely fictional. I really like to sprinkle it in with very, very real references. I like the education behind that. So, yeah, you have to get it right. And I'm pretty careful about doing that, maybe too much. I have, in my third manuscript that I just turned in, I have a restaurant that's 100 years old in New York, and I mentioned the street that it's on. And then as I wrote the entire scene, and then I did just a tiny bit more research and found out that the year, like 1 year prior, which is when my book actually takes place, it was on a different street. And I rewrote everything just so I could get it on the right street. And nobody is probably ever going to know that, but I would know that I put out something incorrect. So I'm just kind of strict with myself about that.
Well, no, but I think it's a fair thing to do, because you really don't know who's going to read it. And I think that as writers, you really want to put a quality product out there, basically, and making sure every detail is correct. To, like you're saying, no one may notice, but I promise you, if it's wrong, they will.
Right. I'm sure that that's the case. Hopefully in the copy edit stage it gets noticed, and there's been a few things that as all the different editors look at it, something will be caught. But I feel like the buck stops here. The author needs to get it right in the first place, and to the extent that I can, I try to make that all correct.
Right. So you have just recently moved to Colonial Williamsburg, and yes. So what is that like? What do you miss from before you moved, and what did you think you'd miss and you absolutely don't?
I miss family and friends back in Texas for sure. I miss all the amenities that a big city has, but we made a choice to move to a small city very deliberately. It was a lifestyle we were just ready for. So I love being coastal. I love being in such a historic area. And here's the really, really fun part about living right by Colonial Williamsburg. Apparently, the costumed interpreters who work there must not be a rule that they have to get out of costume before they reemerge into the regular world. Because I'll be at Trader Joe's, I'll be at the post office, we'll be driving, and there's Thomas Jefferson on his cell phone buying apples and things like that. And that has become a really regular occurrence, and it cracks me up every time I see somebody historical doing something so non-chronological out in the real world. And so I'm still getting really good laughs out of that.
Well, I guess so. Betsy Ross, riding down the street in a motorcycle would kind of throw me as well. So, that would be interesting.
I take pictures all the time. I'm like a total stalker of these things. I try to position my camera just right, and then I post them as I see them so everybody else can share the joy.
Yes, and you do. You post quite a bit on Facebook, and it's a lot of fun. So if you're just tuning in, we are talking to author Camille Di Maio. She is the author of Memory of Us, set in World War II in London, and then Before the Rain Falls, set in Texas prisons, women's prison system in Texas in the 1940s, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then your newest book that I just read this morning that you had turned in the manuscript you're excited about, The Way of Beauty, is coming out next April. So can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yes, The Way of Beauty is set in New York City from 1900 to 1963. So it's a very specific time period for me because it follows the building, the heyday, and then the destruction of the Pennsylvania Railroad Station. And it was very grand. It had Italian marble. It was designed after the train stations of Paris. It was an amazing way to enter the city. And it also involved digging all the tunnels under the East River and the Hudson Rivers. But as train travel declined, it started to go into bankruptcy, and they tore it down to build Madison Square Garden. But because of what the city lost in the train station, 700 buildings went on to be saved. It was kind of the sacrificial land that ended up saving one of the major libraries. It saved Grand Central. It saved several Broadway theaters. All of these were slated for destruction. But the loss of Penn Station made people realize that we need to preserve these places, not tear them down just to be modern. And so that's the backdrop for my story, and it follows the lives of 3 generations of women in a family from the building, the heyday, the destruction of it. So talk about research. Wow. There was a lot of research in that one. But, yes, I got very good news. One of my editors yesterday that they read through it first time and said they thought it was their favorite of what I've turned in so far. So that feels amazing as a writer to hear that, especially because we had the move going on as I was writing it. I thought, I'm just pushing to the deadline and getting this in, but they really loved it.
Wonderful. Well, and where do you get a lot of your research? Because, when you read just textbooks or anything else, and I noticed this when I just recently traveled. We took this incredibly insane road trip with the kids and ended up in Grand Canyon. And we were there, and I was in the gift shop, and I found all these books about these women that I had no idea had helped, get people out to the Grand Canyon, doctors and rangers and, all this other stuff. So, is that where you go for research like this? Because a lot of times it seems it's only written about, the big players when something like this happens.
It just, as a writer, you can just live life, and there might be 50 things in a day that inspire you, and what are the few that scream, I need to be a story, louder than everything else. And then once you kind of fixate on what that is, you start doing the research from a bunch of sources to do it. Sometimes it's from my travels and things that I observed, or a tour I take, or it's books that I read, or it's largely internet research because so much of this is just done at home and in a coffee shop, so a lot of it's internet research. It starts for me with just an idea, and then I will go wherever I need to go to have all the research support it.
Have you been able to do any interviews, like with people who may have had, like you were talking about your most recent, the book you just turned in, were you able to talk to people who may have had family that worked on the railroad or helped construct all that?
To do that, but it's funny that real life really gets in there while you're researching, and with our impending move and then all that went on with that, it really was strictly just the research. However, there's so many resources online that are narratives from people that have been posted. I read like 68 pages about the history of the people who were building the tunnel. So there really was so much that I was able to just get from things that people have posted on the internet, which was great. But now that I've switched to being a writer full time, that is absolutely something I would love to incorporate. And in fact, the fourth book that I'm just starting to pen takes place in Coronado, California. So I'm going to take a trip there in September, and very much with the focus of talking to people. I don't know who yet, but I need to put some feelers out, and I would like to start to bring that into it.
Wow. Well, so say someone is starting out as a historical author, and let's say they want to set it in the 1950s in Chicago. And where would you, as someone approaches you and says, I want to write about 1950s Chicago? Of course, that's very general. But where would someone go for, say, architecture, or where streets were, or general maps, or general layout of the city? Where would someone start for something like that?
The first thing I do is I love the images section of Google or Bing. So you just go into the search engine and go under images instead of web and type in 1950s Chicago. That's where I would start. And you're going to get all sorts of images. And you just kind of scroll through those until there's something that just really sparks your imagination. And you say, this thing or this image has to be in the book. And you start to take notes. And then you can start to get more and more specific. If it's a street layout, you could say 1950s Chicago map or 1950s Chicago architecture, and start to get more and more specific as you hone in on that. At least for me, I'm a very visual person, and so looking at images is one of the very, very first things that I do, and then that will start to inform which direction I want to go and where I may need to get the research from that point on.
And so as you've gone from your first book and now you're working on your fourth, has your research more fine-tuned, like you know exactly where to go, and you know what pulls you away from what you're trying to do?
Facebook pulls me away. I'll have this idea where I just need to, I run to a thesaurus.
Yes.
Thesaurus.com is a great resource, and I'll say, I need to look at this one word, and then while it's loading, I don't like to waste any seconds of anything. So while it's loading, I'll say, I'll open Facebook and see if I have any messages. And then half an hour later, I go, oh, yeah, what was that word? So I need to figure out a way to just shut all that down and be really focused on the research. But is it more focused and do I know where to go? I definitely have my go-tos now, at least for starting, which number one is the images, and just it kind of goes from there. Depending on how old or how obscure some of the historical details are, you might need to dig more and more. But the Internet's a great starting point, and then you have to make sure that the resource on it, that it's good, it's truthful. And sometimes you have to cross-check that stuff, but it's really such an amazing thing. I don't know how people wrote before the Internet.
Yeah, it's quite fascinating. You can find quite a few, like you're saying, narratives. People are entering stuff, and I think people are more than willing to talk to you about it. I have a friend of mine from St. Louis. Her father was one of the engineers on the Arch, and she talked about that and how they didn't lose anybody on it. No worker died. And I thought, well, that's an unusual thing for her to say. And then I didn't realize that as they were building it, they built in the possibility and like a percentage of how many workers would die building this thing.
Oh, my. Wow. I'd never heard anything like that.
Right. So it's bizarre. So they actually factored that in. That seems a little morbid. But they didn't lose anyone, which was a really big deal. So all those guys, right, and those guys walked away from it not only thinking we built this big monument, we didn't lose anyone.
And
so, that's the kind of story.
An idea will just
come
in conversation. You're not even looking for an idea sometimes, so you might just have a conversation like that, and there's an idea. Like, that would make an amazing story to look into, is everything that went into that. I mean, I have another idea. First, I'm making notes on a fifth book right now, and it came from just something random my brother said about high school. I wasn't even looking for a story idea, but it just intrigued me so much that suddenly I'm taking notes on it. So I think that somebody my advice number 2 for somebody wanting to be a writer is just be open and be listening. And, when you put that awareness out there of the fact that there are stories everywhere, it might start with a narrative. Maybe you're not seeking out a narrative, but you're just in conversation and the narrative comes to you.
Yeah, I think that's one of the big things that a lot of people, in fact, I was talking to someone this morning and telling him, you should come to our writers group, and he says, why? Everybody there knows what they're doing. What am I going to learn there? I can't bring anything to the group. And I said, well, we've all been that person. And the whole point is show up and listen and learn and ask. And I think fear does deter a lot of people who truly would like to try.
It's so true, and here I am. I'm working on the 4th one, and the others have been doing well, and I sit down and I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I'd say there's 90% of the days where you're writing, and I know other writers feel this, you're writing and you go, this is garbage, why did they buy it? I can't believe I had this idea. And I'm a really positive person, but when it comes to my writing, I am my own worst critic. And then there'll be 10% of the time where you write something and you just go, that was awesome. That dream, what you imagine writing to be is the moment of inspiration, and those moments are beautiful. But the fact is, most of the time you're just trying to be diligent about getting your word count out, just pressing on, getting your story done. You can always make it wonderful in the editing process. But I like to tell people that if you're writing a first draft, if you're trying to compare that to a published work, you're really doing yourself a disservice, because all first drafts they're just exactly that. They're not ready for prime time. And by the time it gets published, you've gone through not only your own drafts, but your acquiring editor, your developmental editor, your copy editor, your proofreader. It's gone through so many people by the time it's a published work. You just can't make that comparison. It's not fair to yourself.
It's kind of like literary Photoshop.
Oh yeah, it's fine-tuned and fine-tuned, squeezes you. So, the first time I went through that process, the next few books I read after being through my first editing process, it revolutionized even how I read. I just began to have a newfound respect for any book out there and what it takes for somebody not only to just finish a draft, but then to go through all the paces that it takes. It's quite a remarkable process and very much a collaborative one.
Well, I know that it's also, you really have to be willing to put your baby on the block, basically. I mean, and be willing to be open when that first round of edits comes back, because like any of us, we think what we've written by the time it gets to our editor is the most brilliant thing they have ever seen in their entire life. And then you get it back and you go, oh, wow, this is really bad.
Yes, that's what happened. You can understand my joy at my editor's call yesterday or email yesterday that they loved it. Oh, wow, that is not the experience I was expecting, because you do expect together.
Yes. And so the next time you will be signing will be at RWA, correct, in Orlando in a couple of weeks?
Yes, I will be there with Before the Rain Falls.
Wonderful. And then you've got 2 other projects you're thinking about. You're heading to Coronado in the fall. What other than research, what other things are you hoping to see when you're out in San Diego?
I spent 2.5 weeks there last year, so I got to do a lot of the touristy things. So this one will be fairly focused on the book, and it's also we just celebrated our 20th anniversary, so we're making it a little getaway trip just for the 2 of us. So it'll be kind of a combination of just not having the 4 kiddos with us and book research. So we're going to keep it pretty simple and probably just within a few blocks.
Right, and just walk. That's one of the beautiful things I noticed last year when we were all out there in San Diego, was you could walk a lot, and the weather was also conducive of it as well. So it's a great place to inspire.
It is.
Yeah.
It's really such a cool place. It's very historical, and as I'm researching that too, this is where I get into the research hole. There's so many cool things I'm learning just in the pre-research stage. I'm trying to tighten that into a story rather than writing a 600-page novel about all the cool things I'm reading about.
I know. It does get exhausting. So I really appreciate you talking to us today, Camille. If you are interested in touching base with Camille, she is online. She's on Facebook, and you would spell her name CamilleDimaio.com. She's on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, correct? And she's posting things about eating her lobster out in Maine, and she's having a big time. So check in with her. And thank you again so much for talking with us today, Camille.
Great. Thanks for having me.
You have a great one.
You too.
This show brought to you by Circle of Seven Productions, www.cosproductions.com. Please be sure to subscribe and welcome to our circle.